From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
The Wild West was probably more organized than Israel is, because in the Wild West you always had somebody like, well, the Earp brothers, Wyatt and his brothers, or Wild Bill Hickok, or somebody who would try to step in and restore some law and order to some of these places. But you don't see any of that here in what we're studying. Because, we said the key scripture is that there's no king in Israel, which means there's no ruler, there's no leadership of any kind. And everybody's doing what they want, what's right in their own eyes. And so we have the Levites, who are supposed to be the leaders, part of the leaders, and they're not doing anything. And if you remember, when we started talking about, this faithful remnant, we started with Elijah. And remember Elijah and the priests of Baal and the big confrontation, and he ends up killing them all. And then, of course, Ahab's wife, Jezebel, sends her crew of priests, who he, I guess, forgot about, and they came after him. And he's crying out to God, I'm the only one. Well, God says, I have 7,000 who are reserved to me. Then we go to Gideon. Gideon's only got 300. And Samson can't get anybody to help him. So we see this progression in Israel of, just downward. And so here we are, and we talked about this Levite who hired himself out as a private priest to this man. And again, that was forbidden. So let's go back and look at the scripture. We're in Judges 17, and starting with verse 6. In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And of course, we said that the Levite hired himself out. That's verses 1 through 13. And then we go and we see the tribe of Dan. Now the tribe of Dan, starting in chapter 18, just decided that they were tired of trying to subdue their portion of the land. All the tribes were given a portion, and they were told that you're going to have to kick out utterly all the Canaanites that are living there. Now that was the command of God, that you're going to have to subdue this land and get rid of whoever is there. And they didn't do it. They made treaties. They allowed this tribe to live and this tribe to stay, and they would tax them and try to, like that, but they did not fully ever subdue the land. So what happens is you get this undercurrent of idolatry throughout. And throughout the whole history of Israel, it's there. You have the official worship going on, and then you have this undercurrent. And the kings, the good kings of Israel, most of them weren't good, continually are trying to get rid of this. David did, and even Saul tried to make a show of doing that. Of course, we found out he was part of it because he went to the witch of Endor. Now, why was she around? She was working underground. And so there's this constant thread of idolatry throughout Israel. And Dan, the tribe of Dan, just decides one day that they're just tired of fighting, and so they pick up and move to the north. and they go into this land, and they not too many people there, and they just set up. And guess what? They take their idol with them. And the idol is a golden calf. Now, I thought the golden calf we got rid of that back, I guess not. Because here they're the first tribe to set up their own idol. And so they move up to this new land, and that's in chapter 18. And we'll just review that. In those days, we said there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen into them among the tribes of Israel. And the children of Dan, and the reason it hadn't is because they were not fighting for it. And the children of Dan sent from their family 5 men from their coasts, men of valor, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, Go search the land. When they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. When they were by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned in hither and said unto him, Who brought thee hither? And what makest thou in this place? And what hast thou here? And he said to them, Thus and thus dealeth Micah with me, and hath hired me, and I am his priest. And they said to him, Ask counsel, we pray thee, of God, that we may know whether our way which we go shall be prosperous. Now this is right up to date. Here we have somebody who's out of God's will. They pretty much know it. And they want to do something that they want to do. And so what do? They find a minister, a preacher, a religious person to bless them. They go to somebody and they say, well, I want to do this. I want to marry this person, and I'm just tell it like it is, leave my wife, marry somebody else. This has all happened in the church. They go and they say, well, I got it, and they'll find somebody to say it's all good. Oh, it's okay. It's all good, and to bless it. And that's just what we see so much of in the church today. People go and they'll find somebody who's a prophet of God, who's, and they'll say, yeah, that's okay. I got that word, And so they go on and do something just completely out of God's will. They want to move to the north. They want to move out of their land and set up their little shop with their idol and pretend to be God's people and all of that. And they're looking for somebody to say it's okay. And so they go to this priest. And he says, sure, you're fine, I mean, what's he going to say? He's already out of where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be 100 miles down south in Bethlehem. That's his assigned territory. See, we all have in the church a ministry. See, there's no bench warmers in the church. The church is an army. It's not a football team, It's an army. When you join the army, you got a job. And you do that job every day. And when you're not there, you're missed. Believe me. Take it from somebody who's been a leader of small units. You missing Snuffy Private, you miss him because somebody's got to carry his gear, somebody's got to do his job, somebody's got to cover this and cover that. So, there's no bench sitters in the church. Now, that's not what we see, but that's the way it's supposed to be. See, what we see is the stars up front and everybody else on the bench. That's what you see in most churches. Now, that's true. You don't, we've all been, like I said, everybody here has been around the block through some system, and that's just the way, we're organized. So these guys are taking advice from this Levite who's out of his assigned area and not doing what he's supposed to do, because they all had Levites assigned to the tribes. So when you went, if you were sick, you were supposed to go to the Levite and show yourself. And he would say, okay, he would determine, is this leprosy or is this something else? If it was leprosy, you had to separate yourself and all of this. And when Jesus healed somebody, what did he say? Show yourself to the priest. See, because that was the law. That was the way it was supposed to work. He would heal somebody, go show yourself to the priest so they can officially say you're healed. So that was his job. He's supposed to be down, and he's just floating around. And so what do? They say, well, we like this guy. This guy's all right. He's saying what we like. So, and the priest said to them, go in peace, before the Lord is your way wherein you go. In other words, it's all good. God's with you. Go on down and do what you're going to do. So they liked this guy so much, they decided to hire him. Man, this is good. We'll take this guy along, and then we'll just get a double blessing here. Verse 14. Then answered the 5 men that went to spy out the country of Laish, and said unto their brethren, do you know that there is in the houses an ephod and teraphim and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what ye have to do. And they turned thitherward and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, even unto the house of Micah, and saluted him. And the 600 men appointed with their weapons of war, which were of the children of Dan, stood by the entering of the gate. And the 5 men that went to spy out the land went up and came in thither, and took the graven image and the ephod and the teraphim and the molten image, and the priest stood in the entering of the gate with the 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. And these men went to Micah's house and fetched the carved image and the ephod and the teraphim and the molten image. Then said the priest unto them, what do ye? And they said unto him, hold thy peace, lay thy hand upon thy mouth, and go with us, and be unto us a father and a priest. It is better for thee to be a priest in the house of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe and a family of Israel. So they basically took their swords out and said, you're coming with us. Now, he was willing to go because they gave him a raise. They gave him more money. They gave him a better deal. He can be a priest to a whole tribe of Israel instead of just one man. And the priest's heart was glad. And he took the ephod and the teraphim and the graven image and went in the midst of the people. So they turned and departed and put the little ones and the cattle in the carriage before them. When they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men that were in the houses near to Micah's house were gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they cried unto the children of Dan. And they turned their faces and said unto Micah, what aileth thee that thou comest with such a company? And he said, you have taken away my gods which I made, and the priest, and ye are gone away. And what have I more? And what is this that ye say unto me? What aileth thee? So Micah's a little upset that they took his priest and his idols. See, he made all these idols. He made the graven image. Remember, he took the money from his mother, had it melted down, made an image. And he had these little teraphim, these household gods that all the different nations had those. I mean, everybody had their little, over the fireplace, usually they'd have their little household gods, and they would worship them. And so these, the Israelites are no different. They're doing the same thing. And so Micah's left out in the cold. He's got no priest, no idols, nothing. And the children of Gad said to him, let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. In other words, we're taking this guy, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back into the house. And they took things the things which Micah had made, and the priests which he had, and came into Laish unto a people that were quiet and secure. And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon. Now Zidon was the city that supposedly had the rule over this particular area of land, but there was a mountain range in between this valley and Zidon. Zidon's on the coast, and so they didn't have anybody, there was no army to save these people, so the Danites wiped them out. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man, and it was in the valley that lieth by Beth Rehob. And they built a city and dwelt therein. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And they set up Micah's graven image, which he made, and all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. So they set up their own priesthood, their own image, and they just continued on until the captivity, till the Assyrians came down and took them all captive, and that was the end of it. But they're the first tribe to be officially worshiping idols. Now, you'll see when Israel's divided, you have the 10 tribes in the north and the rest in the south, then the official religion is going to be set up by Ahab, and that's going to be the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. But here we have Dan, they're setting the tone, because Israel, the northern part, was more corrupt than the southern. They were far more into idolatry than the tribes in Judah. Now, they both went into captivity, but see, Israel never returned from captivity. The 10 northern tribes never came back. They were scattered. But the tribes in the south, in Judah, they returned from Babylon. But the northern tribes never did. So, here we have, again, a situation where there's no leadership anywhere. There's no king. Of course, we said that wasn't the plan to begin with, but they're not even, obeying any of the rulers. The judges that have been raised up, they come and go, they raise them up, but, the judges aren't really all that great. Look at Gideon. He returns to idolatry at the end. And Samson, of course, gets killed in the temple. And after Samson, there's not even a judge being raised up. And so God is just allowing them to be oppressed, and will be until the time of Samuel. Now, Samuel will be another judge that'll be raised up, a priest, and he will start to exert some leadership. Of course, he's the one that anoints Saul as king, and David, later David, and Saul is the first king, and that doesn't go so well. But anyway, there's this big gap in time. And, this is Israel. This is the nation that God chose to lead the other nations of the earth to the true God. That was Israel's purpose, was to point all the nations of the earth to the true God. And they're not doing anything like that. And the church is the same way. We're supposed to be pointing people to the true God. And what are we doing? Are we? Us here, we're trying, but the church as a whole, what are they pointing them to? They're pointing to everything under the sun. You know, you go to church and what do you get? You know, they put you in a seat, and if you're there for a month, maybe they'll give you a little job to do. It's all about growth, but it's not about salvation. It's all about filling the seats and paying the bills, but it's not about pointing people to the true God and what He requires as a lifestyle. You know, you don't hear almost no holiness preaching anywhere. You know, you don't hear anything about separating yourself from, you know, the world and its ways. And of course, now times are different. I understand that. 100 years ago, if you were a pastor, you preached against the honky-tonks, you preach against, you know, whatever like that. But you know what? I don't have a cell phone, but if this is a cell phone, the honky-tonk's right here. It's all here, friends. Everything is here in your little device, whatever you carry, a phone, tablet, computer, whatever. So if you're a pastor, you know, what do you preach against? Like I said, 100 years ago, it was different. You preached against, you know, the girly shows and the carnival and the bar and then later television. When television came along, there were pastors who preached against the old one-eyed monster and stuff like that. But, you know, now it all comes to you. You don't have to leave your house, friends. We're living in this cave society, and it is. Everybody's got their little digital cave. They got their music. They got their shows they want. They got a job that's digital. They've got the whole thing, and they don't have to move from where they're at. They can go from one screen to another screen to another screen, and it's all there. And so they don't even go shopping. They have these services now where they mail the food to you. You've seen those. You know, you don't have to go out and rub elbows at Walmart and get dirty and be with the real people to pick your vegetables and your food. Oh, they just ship it up to you. It's crazy. People do not want to be moved. And I don't know what God's going to have to do to get anybody's attention. It's like Pastor John used to say, can people even hear God through everything? So maybe we're going to have some kind of shutdown, who knows, where everybody's phone goes off. And I mean, I don't want people to be without lights and water and all this stuff that's computer driven, but maybe that's, you know, what has to happen to get people woke up. But you know how it is out there. You know how people live now. And so, you know, what is the church doing today? What are we doing? We're not pointing people to God. We're pointing people to programs and to, you know, stuff. People don't want, past ministers don't want to take a stand. They want to compromise. They want to let everybody in. And it's a mess. And so when we look at Israel, we have to say to ourselves, is there any king in our land? Who's king in the church? You know, we're, you know, like Israel. Who's king in the church? Is Jesus really king? You know, because if he is, then what did Jesus say? He said, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. And we just don't see that. We're just like Israel. We have no leadership. Now, again, there's exceptions. You know, we say everybody, we don't mean everybody. Just like in Israel. Now, somewhere, even in this mess, there's people that are faithful because they're producing people like a Samuel. He had faithful parents. And Samson had faithful parents. So, you know, there's still this remnant they're not being named. We don't know their names and stuff all the time, but there's still this remnant, because when Samuel comes along, his mother, of course, dedicates him, takes him in, dedicates him to the priest, and of course the priest, the high priest, and his sons are a mess. You know, they're taking everybody's offering for themselves and fooling around with the women and all of this kind of thing that's going on, and he's allowing it. He's not doing anything to discipline his sons. So, but they're still faithful people. And that's where Samuel's going to come from, and David, you know, and people like that. But to just look at Israel as it is now, I mean, you just shake your head. This is the great nation that God chose and showed all these miracles to. You know, the people in Jesus' time, there should have been no problem following God. They should have seen so many miracles, and what did they want from Jesus? Well, just do another something else and we'll believe then. Do another trick. You know, I always say it that way. Do another trick, Jesus. Like he's some stage magician, you know, healing people and all this other jive. But, you know, and then we'll believe. And they never did. He would, you know, do a miracle, and they still didn't believe it. And they had all of this revelation from Moses' time to their time. All the miracles, all the deliverance, all of that. And yet they couldn't follow God. A prophet would come up and they'd kill him. Jesus said, you killed them all, you're going to kill me. And so, you know, we do the same thing. We get true men of God, women of God, and what do? We kill them. They end up in bad places. They end up getting the boot. Anybody been booted out of a church? Yes, ma'am. You raise your hand. Yep. So it happens. And all you want to do is worship God.
That's all I do.
You weren't gossiping, I'm sure. You weren't setting one against another or whatever, and you just wanted to worship God. Wow. So we have to come back and say, in closing, that the modern church right now prohibits what the Bible allows and allows what the Bible prohibits. Because the Bible allows you to worship God, to raise your hands, to speak in tongues, to, you know, be loud, to, you know, do that. And yet the modern church forbids that, but they'll allow everything else. They'll allow everything else. And so that's the situation that we see in the church. And you know it's true. God's going to have to just, I don't know, raise up the stones or something to have a people. Because he's going to have a people one way or another. You know, if we don't want to go, it's like, I don't know if you guys ever knew Rex Barber in Cedar Rapids. He used to have a rock up here on this podium or his pulpit. And he had it written on there. It says, if you don't, I will. It means if we don't worship God and follow God, the rocks will, and the trees, and the animals, and creation will do it, because, you know, he's going to have his way.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.